Hello, everyone. We will get started here in just a minute. All right. I always love the tech setup for new. I don't think I've used Teams. No, I guess I did recently use Teams as a webinar, so I guess I should be experienced, but it's always something new. Cool. All right. Well, it is right at 12 o'clock here, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for everyone joining today. I hope you have a good lunch or a good, snack or something to join along here. We are going to go over one of my most favorite topics, Power Automate approvals for Business Central. I was just trying to see, let's see, I always forget if I'm sharing a screen or a window, but I was going to show, I'll throw this over here. I don't know if we can see this or not. Somebody throw me a chat message. Can you see this YouTube video? Oh, perfect. Do you see a PowerPoint or do you see the YouTube video? Ah, cool. What I was going to show you is I always say that I've been producing terrible videos on YouTube since like 2018 or 2019. So what I did is I actually went back and found one of my very first YouTube videos using way back when we called it Flow for Power Automate approvals. At this point in time, there was only 405 times that this has been used. So, needless to say, you see, I mean, it's had a few views over the years. But anyways, I figured I would just use that as a little bit of credibility, to share about why I love talking about this topic here, and why I want to share with you guys some of the things that I've learned using Power Automate for Business Central approvals over the years. So today, a couple things that we will get started. There is a lot. I hope to go through everything, but also allow some time for questions at the end. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. I will do my best to answer them as I go, but sometimes I get a little bit sidetracked, so I just have to ignore them and then circle back at them at the end. So I do have some time where I'm going to try to get through some Q&As as well. So we're going to talk about kind of how to get started working with Power Automate approvals for Business Central. We're also going to take a look at exactly how they work, right? I like to not only be able to use something, but to know exactly how it's working. So we're going to share that as well. The templates for the approvals are amazing. So we're going to take a look at those and where we should start and create them. We're also going to take a look at what type of approvals are available because there's actually more than one. Not sure how many people know that or not. And then finally, I'm also going to talk about what I'll call like the pros and cons and the lessons learned along the way. And then, like I said, we will have a Q&A session as well. All right. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mary Myers. I am the Chief Maximizer at World Max, and I am obsessed with maximizing Business Central and Dynamics with the Power Platform. Often I find a lot of people have problems with this, so I am here to solve those problems for you. And prior to being in the technology industry, I was actually a super user and ran several different SMBs while finishing school through that process. So before I was ever in the technology side, I was struggling on the other side, which is why I absolutely love what I do because now I can help solve other people's problems since I feel like I understand them firsthand. And yes, I've been doing this since 2018. My QR code there that goes to my stay on stores. If you want to schedule any time with me, I also have a little PDF, like a free download on how you can automate customer onboarding to your customers in Business Central if you're not already doing that using Microsoft Forms and Power Automate. So kind of cool to check out there. Okay. So, the biggest question I get, and I'm sure that maybe at least one of you can let me know in the chat if at least one of you have wondered this before. Should I use Business Central out-of-the-box workflows, or should I use Power Automate workflows, right? And so here, I guess one of my first answer to that question will be, in good old consulting, response would be, it depends, right? It really does depend. And my goal is that maybe after hearing the things and my experiences and my opinions on this, that you will have kind of your own depends and make your own decisions. Because what I really want to say is I am not saying that one of them is better than the other. I think that there is a time and place for everything, and that when you're equipped with the information of at least how the Power Automate side works, then you can determine for your customers or for your specific needs when you want to use one or the other. All right. So first things is getting started. All right. Now I am going to, well, I don't even have to be that fancy now that I know I can just whip this over here. Okay, so the first thing is whenever we're getting started with using Power Automate for Business Central, that I get asked is it's going to be about licensing, right? Like, what type of licenses do I need to make this work? And that's one of the reasons that I love Power Automate for Business Central is we don't need any additional licenses, right? So whatever license that you have in Business Central, that's obviously going to get your data in Power Automate as well. So for that, right, in Business Central, you need at least a team member license, right? A team member license is equivalent to do an approval. So you will need at least a team member license. Okay. Then the next thing is permissions. So here we see I have Business Central. Or maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger. Okay, cool. So if I go into permissions, first off, let's go into permission sets. Now there is a group one. If I just come in here and I type in power, okay. So this automate exec, right? This is the Power Automate action. There is, well, there's a couple different things here. There's this instant button in Power Automate, in Business Central. As you've probably seen, they've created some new buttons and actions that allow you to use Power Automate even more innately. Now, if you can't see that, there's probably a permission issue, right? And that's where I'd say first, come here and make sure that you have the automate exec permission set up for yourself. If you don't want your organization to be able to use this, then you're going to disable this, right? So just kind of wanted to call that out. There is also one other part. There is a privacy notice status. Yep. Okay. So you see here, mhm, for Power Automate, you can agree to this for everyone, disagree for this for everyone, or let users decide. So these are two areas that basically, if you can't see Power Automate or you don't want people to see Power Automate, check these two settings here. As far as kind of getting started, in addition to making sure that we have licenses. Also, in the Power Platform, we have environments, and those environments are different than our Business Central environments. Anyone that's ever been in Power Platform, you know that you're going to have like this standard default environment. In fact, let me switch over here to show you specifically what I mean. Oh, that's real small. Okay. So you see here, right? I've got three different environments. I have a super descriptive one here called test. I also have this default one, right? And then I have Sales Pro, which is honestly where I keep my Sales Pro. That's where my Dataverse environment is. This World Max, that's just a personal productivity environment. And you should actually never build like organizational flows inside of that environment, right? And so often what is set up in Business Central over here is that if I come into here, for example, and I come into my customers, we can build flows from here, right? And so if I automatically tell it to come into here, oops, and I come into automate, we know how here, and I say create a flow from here. So if I tell Power Automate, or if I tell Business Central to create a flow from here, if I don't set what environment I want it to create in, it's automatically going to set in that default environment. So before you're ever building a flow, what you want to do is you want to come over here, right? And we can do it from two different places. So one is going to be under here in assisted setup. I'm lazy, so I type power and it brings me right here to Power Automate. And so when I click on this Power Automate environment, yeah, I'm just gonna say, yep, that's fine. What you'll see is I'll hit next, next. This is going to give me a list here and it says, hey, which environment do you want us to actually create our templates in, right? And if I don't set it to anything, it will automatically set to the default environment here, right? But I want it to, so I can identify here which one I want set up in. So for Power Platform, we should have like a production environment, a development environment, right? Maybe a test environment, however you're going to have your Power Platform environments, will ultimately align with your Business Central environments. So you can align by each environment here, how you want this to map to your Power Platform. So that is something, again, that I would say to make sure that you go ahead and take care of before you get started. Also, just recently, what they have just come out with. So here, right, if I just come here, this is my admin center. So this is just taking me to my admin center here. If this is this Sandbox 24, right, that I was looking at before, if we scroll down here now, we see that we have this linked Power Platform environment. And so it comes in here and it says, link Power Platform environment. Now, in mine, it says that I don't have anything that's linkable because I don't have a Sandbox Power Platform environment. I just have a production one. And if I come back here for a moment, oops, environments, and I look at this production one, right? That's my production, Business Central, because I run, my company on Business Central. And I come down here and I see that I can link this from here. Now I do, right? As I said before, this is where my Dataverse environment is. And so it says production, and I can set this here and then, link and move forward. So this is brand new. This just came out like within the last couple days, actually. Stefano Delmani, probably just butchered that name. I'm sure everyone knows who I'm talking about. I think I just saw like a post or something that he put out saying that this just came out. So I was like, sweet. I was talking to my buddy Blage, who is the PM over there at Microsoft for the Power Automate connector, and he was telling me that this was coming, and now it's here. So I want to make sure that I shared that with y'all. Okay. So those are kind of the administrative tasks that I would say, to have set up as we're getting started, right? That's licensing, saying, hey, we obviously have to have a Business Central license, but it can be something as simple as a team member license. Let's make sure that our environment is set up appropriately and that if we have any permissions that were set up there as well. Okay. So that's our getting started portion. Now, let's take a look I'll call it under the hood at how the Power Automate approval works for Business Central here. So I'm just going to peruse over to, let's say, a purchase order real quick. Okay, sorry. I am super short and I always like sit on my legs, but then my feet go numb and I have to like switch around a lot. But anywho. Okay, so if I'm in this purchase order here, what we have typically, right? It actually doesn't matter if I'm using an out of the box workflow or not. Any place in Business Central where we come in here and we have this request approval, there is a Power Automate template available for you to use to create a Power Automate workflow instead of a Business Central workflow. So that's one thing to know first, right? So that's this. So if I hit this send approval request, that is the trigger for this workflow. So let me come in here real quick. Which environment am I in here? Let me see if it'll let me do this here, and I'll say create approval workflow. And another thing that's really cool too, now this isn't really approval centric, but the templates are getting so cool in Power Automate for Business Central. And so it is smart, and it is looking at the page that you're on. And if the page that you're on has a request approval, has an approval webhook on there, then you're going to see this create approval Power Automate template in here automatically. Now, again, they have done more things to integrate our Business Central stuff right inside of Power Automate. So it's recommended that you actually create your template, right, for your flow, or if you're using Power Automate approvals, to create it from here, because it's going to essentially collect some good information or important information from Business Central right into your flow. That's going to save you from having to do that. So let's go ahead and click on this real quick now so I can show you this. Give me a second to go. So I need some good Taylor Swift music playing in the background. Okay, so I'll just pick this first one here, and we'll kind of get over into some of the other stuff. So the first thing that it's doing right is it gives us this flow name. I would always recommend kind of changing these, because that way you'll know which one is which. So we'll let's see here, I'll do this, and I'll just call this webinar just so I know which one this is for. Now, I will say, if you have more than one purchase order approval workflow set up, when you go to trigger it, it's going to trigger right. And I know this because I often have tons of them in my system, because I build them for, I don't know, videos, webinars, all different types of things. And then when I go to try to make it work, it doesn't trigger, because it's like, hey, we've got like 90 of these. Which one do you think we should work? So you only need one. And in here, what it's saying is it's automatically taking my Business Central credentials, right? It's taking all this information. Cool. That's nothing necessarily super new. But as we come into here, what it is going to do is now it's going to take that approval user setup window inside of Business Central to use for the approvers. It doesn't mean that you have to use it, but it is going to look at that. It's also going to take a look at what Business Central environment and company are you currently in? Because then whenever you go and create the template, it's automatically going to populate your environment and company for every Business Central step, which is definitely like a time saver. I often have people say, hey, it's such a pain in the butt for me every time I add a new step in my flow to add the same Business Central company and environment every time. Is there a way that we can just like make that stick? No, there's not, right? But to create any templates like this, that's why it's really, really helpful. Now this is the email title, right? So it's saying like, please approve this PO, and then I'll say create flow. What I love about the way that these templates are set up now is I never have to go into Power Automate. It creates the whole thing right there. So we love that. But what I need to do here is come over here into my flows. Now, I think it ended up creating it in my default environment. Oh, nope, it's right here because I set it to Sales Pro already. Otherwise, it would create it in my default environment. So when I look at this, here's what I want to show you guys in here. Now that we have a template, just saying how quick and easy, this is to actually create. This right here, this first step, this flow triggers, again, whenever we hit this send approval request. So I just kind of want to put that tie in your mind for you, right? So whenever you press that button, that's obviously what triggers this here. Now, this step right here is it's just going and getting some information on the workflow endpoint of this API. Now it's interesting, whenever we do the templates, you can see here that it looks a little bit interesting. We have these X's instead of drop downs. And normally that's a red flag to me. If I see an X mark instead of a drop down, I'm like, oh gosh, this has an opportunity for this to not work. But I will say these templates have gotten really, really good, and these X marks aren't an issue here. But I did just kind of want to share that for you. Sometimes if your flow isn't triggering, look at this, example, or like look at your interface here. And if you see these X's, it could be an indicator. But I know it's not for this one. But as we see here, right, for these, and so I can just click this, right, and it just kind of goes back down to this here. Typically, okay, so that's fine. So when I did this now, because everything was a custom value, now I'll just go like this so that I can get my metadata, and that's fine. I can show you guys exactly what we're doing here. So we said Sandbox 24. It's this company. I forget which company it is. Cronus. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so it's Cronus Company. Now, what they had, here's what I'll say. In the template there, it has this workflow endpoints, but I do my templates a little bit differently, and they both work just the same way, but you won't get as much additional details or outputs if you're looking at this workflow endpoint, right? So this is what I mean. When I look at this workflow endpoint, and then here it has, this is for our purchase documents, and this is on the header. So as you can see here, this is saying, hey, and this is saying, this is the Business Central API that's associated with the approval workflows, okay? So this is saying that you could do one of these on any one of these tables. So I will just map this back to the purchase documents table. And then finally, we're just pulling this little row ID from here. Okay, that's all that is. But if I put a little compose box in here, I always use a compose box because it allows me to see the dynamic output of the step above pretty easily. So if I put my little cursor in here and I click on my arrow here, when I look at this get record, okay, it has some more information. They've expanded this. Okay, so I do have all the information I need. So we're happy here. This gives us all of our stuff. So we're actually fine. So I'm going to delete this, but it just kind of shows you what's coming outside of that record there. So that triggers it. This gets the information. What happens here? This also locks the record, right? And so that takes this from saying open to released. So then it goes through here, this URL, you're going to identify the page number of the approval. And what that does is that allows you to put that nice little link that sends you back to the Business Central page for the approval. This get direct approval. Get direct approver. This is a new portion that's been added to these templates. And this is saying, okay, I'm going to go to this. I love typing on the fly. I always get messed up. Approval user setup. So I don't have anything set up in this one, right? But you guys know what this screen is. This is I don't have a lot of people in my company, which is I don't have it set up. But this is where we put this approval matrix, right? And I can put the purchase amounts. I can put salesperson codes. From here in our salesperson's code, when I come into here, I can also set default dimensions on salespeople code. So I will use this sometimes, but basically we can use the approval matrix if this is what you want your approval matrix to be, or your approval hierarchy. This integration piece will now go and get that. But that doesn't mean that you have to use this approval structure inside of Business Central either. There's plenty of times where I'm creating approvals where we bypass this whole thing. I will say that recently I did not have to create a custom API because we were able to use this. So sometimes you may want to use the internal Business Central approval structure, and sometimes you may want a more complex one. Like I call this a dynamic, like a dynamic approval. Like sometimes we need to look at department and amount, right? So maybe we have a very large organization, and their purchasing team is large and they have different managers, and depending on the amount of that invoice, right? So we need to look at department and that amount to determine who that is, right? That's not necessarily always this matrix here. It could be more complex matrix than what's allowed here. So a lot of times I will do one of two different things before I run into this step here. I will either create a custom table inside of Business Central that basically says who's the approver, what's the department, what's the email, and what are my approval min and maxes, right? And I can create a custom table inside of Business Central. I can also just use Dataverse and create that same table. And then right here say get records, or like get this table from Dataverse, right? So you can do one or the other if you're not going to use that approval structure inside of Business Central. But basically that's kind of how that part works. Then it moves us down here into the approval box, right? A couple things. I'll go through approval types in just a minute. I just, again, wanted to walk through what this structure is doing and how it relates to Business Central for anyone that's not seen that, walkthrough before. But in this approval structure, just like I was starting out with, that you have to have a Business Central license, this approver can't be somebody outside of your organization, right? And so for me, as you can see here, I'm at worldmaxp2.com. I can only have somebody in this approval box that is within worldmaxp2.com, right? So you can't circumvent and say, hey, I'm going to have this outside vendor approve this, or somebody that doesn't have, a license approve this. It won't work like that. Because what it's doing in here, it's this assigned to, as you can see here, now it has this dynamic content that this is pulling from this direct approver. So you can use dynamic content, you can put in an email, you can, if you're doing, like I was referring to, that custom Business Central table or a Dataverse table, right? So this assigned to field is who that email is going to get sent to. And then here, right, this web URL link, that's just that link that will take you back to Business Central. And then in here, let's keep scrolling down for a second. This is just some fancy stuff. These variables just make like the email pretty. It's a nice improvement. I'll say that it's a nice improvement. Now, in down here, what it's going to do, this is a switch statement, right? Because it's saying, hey, we're going to have a few more options than just Boolean. Than just yes or no, which would be a condition. And sorry, I'm just now seeing some questions in here. And like I said, I'll go ahead and try to get to those questions at the end of it. Otherwise, I'll just get too sidetracked. But thanks for keep dropping them in there. I'm not ignoring them. I'm kind of ignoring them, but I'm just saving them for the end. Okay. So we're using a switch statement in here, and this is looking at the outcome. Now, these actions right here, this approve action, this is just the execute action, right? So if you're familiar with our actions inside of Power Automate for Business Central, this is that execute action. And so what it's doing is that API categories, it's going back to that endpoint one, and it's saying that this is approving. This will release the record in Business Central, right? So this is going to release that master record and said this will be set to approved once it has hit this section of the flow, right? Because this is saying, okay, in this outcome, if the outcome was set to approve, then we can go ahead and take the action to release that record so that purchase order can then be used. If the action is set to reject, then we will reject from the API, you know what I mean? And that will send it back to, needs approval, right? And this will interact and this will work just that same way that we would expect the status to work in a standard out of the box Business Central workflow, right? So that's how these two go together. We have the record up top and that locks it, right? Whenever we send that through, triggering that webhook will lock it. And also, when we put this here, this flow will not progress until somebody approves it, okay? Because this says start and wait, so that's going to put this all together. Now, should neither of these actions happen within the 28-day time frame that Power Automate works for approvals, it will cancel the workflow. Okay, so if neither of these actions happen, and this then this will eventually cancel, right? And so this is going to the cancel workflow because they just recently added the cancel action for this as well. So it says approve, reject, and cancel, but this is under the default. Now, I don't like this. I'm be honest, and I've shared my opinion with the team and said, hey, I personally think that this is the change that should be done. And I'll dive into part of this in just a second as well. Let me tell you the change though. So the thing is that I think if we're gonna have this cancel action and we're gonna use this switch statement, this should really be approve, reject, and cancel them here, right? So this, I would add another action here. I would call this cancel, and I would say this should be cancel, right? And then I would drag all of this over here, okay? That's what I would do. And then, you could still have this over here, but in addition to that, you would have to change this a little bit because where is this cancel outcome going to come? You don't have that option yet, right? I would say that we would come up here and we would change this type because here we have this approval type and we have approve and reject and we have some custom responses. Now I'll get more into that in just a second because this is what I would call approval types. But I just I'm just giving you some little teasers along the way here, right? Saying, hey, this is a template. This is how it works. I like to change them up, right? So, but yeah, so after, regardless of whatever action you take here, this Business Central step will go and release the record here in Business Central. So that's kind of how they all circulate around and how the record is locked and released inside of Business Central through Power Automate. Okay. Yeah, I see some questions in here. Like I said, we'll get to them. So moving on here. Templates 101. I think I'm going to kind of pass that through. I feel like we've been going through the templates and I think that there's probably going to be a decent amount of questions. But as you can see, one of the things with the templates is I would say derive them from Business Central because it's going to fill in all of the environment information for you here, right? So that's nice and helpful. You can create them from Power Automate as well, but I just think it's a better approach to do it from here. And then you can customize them as well as you saw here as I was kind of leading into. So that would be, I would say, template 101 I covered as we were looking at under the hood there. So let's talk about approval types. This is the next great place to go to here. So as I was just alluding to, with this, we have a couple different types of approvals. You're going to have the approve and reject, everyone must approve, or approve and reject first to respond. So first to respond, that can be either a group or an individual. And that just means I only need one person to make this purchase order go through, right? I don't need the whole group. As you may suspect, the one that says everyone must approve, guess what? That's going to be a group of people and everyone must approve before that flow will move on. So in our purchase order example, right, if we had a list of 3 people, every person on that group would have to approve it before that order could move on. Now, that is different, I will say, than if I have, let's say, a fixed asset, or maybe I'm going to have a purchase order approval, and first, because it's over $500, it has to be approved. But because it's a fixed asset, it also has to be approved by someone else. That's different. That's an additional layer, right? That's another conditional layer in your approval. And you can have additional approvals, right, in your layer for whatever makes sense. You just have to like map it out. But I just want to say that that is a little bit different. Now, as you can see here, we also have one that says custom responses, and we have the same options for custom response, basically wait for one or wait for any of them. But what that custom response is that allows you to put whatever answer or whatever option you want that's going to come through in that Outlook email, right? Like if you use an Outlook email, it says approve or reject, because 9 times out of 10, people are using the standard approve or reject. But that's what I was saying, that in this little box, where did it go? And honestly, you would have to change this flow up a little bit, and you'll see why here in a second. I would do this, actually, I'll change this right here. I would change this to custom responses. And when I do this custom response, right? So now I can say approve, and then I'll also do reject. And then all I'm doing is adding this button. Every time I add a new button, it's adding, you know what I mean, another little box on that Outlook. And so on this one, I'm also going to put cancel. Okay. And so now this actually aligns with what we're saying, right? So this switch statement, right? This says react on the outcome, and it's saying, hey, I'm going to go look at the outcome of that of that approval, right? And so before it only had 2 options, approve or reject, but we gave it a custom response. We took the template, right? We didn't start from scratch. We took the template and we said, yeah, we're going to make this template better. We're going to change it from approve or reject. We're going to change it to custom response. We're going to add cancel in there. And then we're going to switch this, this box out. Now, I don't know how many times that maybe you would cancel it from there, but needless to say, business process is a different thing. Functionality is different. So with this now, right, in our switch statement, we could have it to be reject, cancel, or approve, right? So before this was hanging out over here, and now what we've done with this is to say, okay, this email that comes through for somebody to approve could be approve, reject, or cancel. Like those 3 options. Now one would say, hey, if this cancels, I need this email to be different. But as you can see, that these are the different, this is what a custom response is. And again, you could have it be anything. It doesn't have to be approve, reject, or cancel. You can have it say yes or no, right? It's an opportunity for you to honestly just kind of change what you're doing, or maybe really expand your functionality for the approvals here. But yeah, those are the different types of approvals that we can do, or I call it a approval response type that we can have here. Now, we also have different types of approvals, right? So like I said, this was approval response types, because these are the responses that we're going to get back. And then we also have the approval types. So the most common one that we're going to see here, oh, I do have these little. Cool. Okay, so the most common one that you're going to see is the start and wait for an approval. And that's the one that we were looking at in the template as well, right? And so in that, it's going to wait until somebody hits either approve or reject or cancel or whatever it is that you have set up for your response types on that flow. It's going to stay right there. If it takes you 3 days to respond or somebody to respond, then it's going to say that flow, you know what I mean, is running for 3 days until it ever moves down into the next part. So that's what that start and wait for an approval is. Now, you can also create an approval, which will go ahead and it'll send out that email, but then it allows you to do different steps in parallel while that approval is happening, before, instead of just holding it at a pause point. And maybe you're like, okay, Mary, but like, give me an example of when we would essentially be breaking that apart. Well, I'm so glad you asked. I've done this in two different scenarios, both of them pretty similar. So one of them is if you're using, and spoiler alert, I'll get to this in my cons part of the slides, is that we don't have that like Business Central audit trail whenever we're using Power Automate approvals, because that approval is not inside Business Central. Okay. So what I will do then is I will use SharePoint, Dataverse, or a custom table that I'll have create inside of Business Central to create my own approval audit trail, right? What time was this sent? And so in that's when I'll separate them, because that way I can log when that approval was sent and the date and time that the approval response was sent. If you keep it in just one, you're only going to be able to like log one action instead of like every action in there. So that's a perfect example of like when I've used that. Very similarly, I did a custom, an even more custom approach for another client where we broke it up, and then what we did is we actually allowed them to be able to use that Power Automate approve or reject. If you've ever tried to do that inside the actual like Power Automate screen, it's kind of like this different UI that's over there on like the right hand side. So we put that inside of Business Central. But again, we needed to break that workflow step out so that we could make and log that happen. So just two different situations where we broke those apart. And then the other type is going to be start and wait for an approval of text. This is the newer one that came out a couple months ago. I'd say maybe 6 to 8 months ago. And this is going to be with like the ones that say, hey, go ahead and use Copilot or create a custom GPT response for me to send out to this customer. It's having this is just approving that text. It's a special approval for text to be approved, because obviously we don't want to just have Copilot go ahead and create anything for our customers without us approving it. But these are the different types of approvals that are inside of Power Automate that we can utilize for Business Central. So again, this start and wait for an approval, that is your most common one. And then the other one is essentially this create an approval and wait for an approval. These two go together. You can't have one without the other. Otherwise, you're just creating it. But this one collects the response. This one creates the response, lets you do things in between. And this one just creates it and then waits the response and collects the response. So those are different types. Okay, cool. Moving into our pros and cons. So pros of using Power Automate for our approvals inside of Business Central would be that it's, very well, it's nicely integrated with Business Central. But I do put like a little asterisk there because I honestly also have this on the cons side on some areas that it's not integrated. But it's getting more and more, advanced, especially I will throw the link into my very first thing. Where did I put that? Here. You guys can, in your leisurely time, you guys can check out my very first Power Automate approval YouTube video and compare it to the templates that we have now, and you will see that it has come a long, long way. So they're coming along. I expect the improvements to come on more. I know that more integrations will be coming. Maybe if we call it Copilot approvals, they'll be able to get approved for finish them up sooner than some other things, but we'll see. One of the other things that I really love about using the Power Automate approvals for Business Central is the amount of flexibility that it allows us. Like, even if it's customer onboarding, right? Not only are we like wanting to make sure that that information is correct, but we can also, send some additional documentation that we need. Maybe we're going to sign an SOW. Maybe we're going to send them, an NDA and an email attachment as well, right? That email that we can. There's so many different things that we can do with purchase invoices on that template as well. Like I said, a lot of times I'll use that purchase invoice template, but then I'll just use some other, like the get attachments API to go ahead and actually get the purchase invoice document, right? That somebody attached to that record, because nobody wants to approve a purchase invoice without actually looking at the invoice, right? Like that's what every accountant is doing, but the template doesn't do that, right? But with Power Automate, we can go and go ahead and get that and have that in the email and have it be nice and user friendly. Um, if you're using so I had one customer, and I've had this happen actually more than one time, where honestly, out of the box, Business Central workflows would have handled their needs just fine. Absolutely just fine. But organizations, or these organizations had a desire to be in the cloud, to be, cutting edge, and they saw a future for them where right now they knew that it was easy and inside the box for Business Central, but they felt like that they would be growing and they would need some more flexibility and they would want to change in the future. And so they have a need to kind of standardize all of their processes and saying, hey, we're going to do as many things as possible in the Power Platform. So let's just have that as like this adoption framework in general. It's also really easy to integrate with the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem, as I was sharing. Like sometimes I'll have a custom API built for Business Central, but you don't have to either, right? If my approval table isn't going to be messed with, often like maybe they don't have like a lot of turnover there and they just need this table. But they don't, maybe because our Business Central customers, sometimes they have a smaller budget, right? And they don't want to have to pay for, that custom API. Newsflash, they don't have to, right? It again depends on the situation. And then on the other side of that, right? While I absolutely love Power Automate for approvals, I'll also say that there are some downsides, like the audit trail, right? That I already gave my spoiler alert on. We don't have that, right? With Power Automate. Super, super easy to create. But there's a lot of times I've, mentioned to partners, especially a couple of years ago when it became more and more mainstream. I'm like, hey, think about this. If your clients need to be SOX compliant, you're going to need to either create a SharePoint, a Dataverse, a Microsoft list, whatever you want, but just create something super simple that's going to track that, right? So that when an auditor comes by then and wants to say, hey, show me the audit log, that you have that ready. Um, and the other thing that you're not going to get with Power Automate approvals yet is in Business Central, we'll have that KPI, right? That says, hey, I've got 4 outstanding approvals that, are needed for you. That's not going to work with this yet. Again, pretty easy to do with a little bit of custom development, but honestly, oftentimes, like I don't find customers really wanting to pay for the extra development just to have that KPI work. But that's one of the other things that doesn't work and kind of why I have that asterisk on that first one there. Um, Also, when you're using Power Automate for your approvals, you can only approve in Outlook or Teams. You cannot approve inside of Business Central, right? And then also, while we have a trigger for the approval, if you're inside of Business Central, we have that like request for approval, but there's also that like cancel approval. That trigger or that webhook isn't associated yet. So again, I had a conversation. I was like, well, maybe we can. So I don't know. I think we'll probably get maybe a BC idea out there to see if anyone else thinks it would be a good idea to have a cancel webhook in there as well. But yeah, so those are kind of some of the pros and cons that I've seen so far. And then as a, like I said, a little added bonus here. Come on, advance. Um, on this super fancy slide, I call it lessons learned. So let's go back to the infamous question of Business Central or Power Automate. I would honestly say like it depends. Um, and honestly, things that I would look to say is what type of compliance, do they need? What type of complexity are they looking at? Most importantly, where do their approvers spend most of their time? Right? If their approvers are never inside of Business Central, then Power Automate's a really great way to go. However, if they're never in Teams and maybe they spend all day long in Business Central, then maybe just standard workflow is the way to go. So that's honestly some of the lessons that I've learned is that like you need to just look at the situation and understand what's best for your users and not just be obviously like we're only going to do it out of the box or we're only going to do Power Automate. No, I would say that you need to kind of understand that there's maybe time and place for both of them. um and then, like I said, the SOX compliant, right? Like understand if you need to have that or need to be aware of that. And then also from a testing perspective, that's the other thing that kind of is like the get your the aha in testing for these approvals, especially the more complex approval hierarchies that you have, is that there's a lot of testing that goes into that. And I don't think I also said this. You must have a service account. I always highly recommend having a service account set up for these as partners. You cannot use a delegated admin account to set up these approval workflows. That will not work. And so in that testing is really important. I would honestly even recommend one of the things that I'm going to look into in part of my processes for our more complex approval workflows is honestly going to be automated testing, because the testing part takes such a long time. I'm kind of going back and forth. Now I always make sure that we have like pretty detailed testing scripts in there in all of our scenarios. But yeah, if you can do automated testing, I would say it's the way to go as well, because that's an important part. So with this, okay, so our summary. It's pretty easy, like I said, to get started. Make sure that you're set up in the right environment is probably the biggest tip that I have for you. And then also be aware of where your permission settings are. And now, hopefully, you have a little bit better concept of how the records are released and, let go of between on that workflow API, really, right? That's approving, rejecting, and locking those records or releasing them. We took a look at our templates. We also discussed the different types of approvals we have, right? You can either essentially have everything wait until it's approved, or you can break that step out if you need to do parallel processes while you're waiting for that approval. And then you can also identify what type of approval response that you want. If you want to use a standard approver reject, or you also have the opportunity to create custom approval responses as well. And then, of course, some pros and cons. There are some good integrations, but there's still some integrations for Power Automate to Business Central that could come. But overall, I think that the flexibility and functionality is super, super helpful. And I've had a lot of clients really save a lot of time by customizing their approval processes. So yeah, okay. With that, we have 8 minutes, and I'm going to try to come up here and go through the questions. Is new Power Automate Admin Center feature part of the 20? I don't think so. I'm not sure. Bob, I don't know. So, Bob, I'm reading your question that says, is the new PA? And I'm assuming that you mean when I went to that BC Admin Center and it had that link down at the bottom. And feel free to, I think you can take yourself off mute. I don't really know if you can. Feel free to.
That was the question. Is it rolling out with wave 1?
I don't think so. Actually, so I'm kind of thinking about this on the fly. I don't think so. And I say that because it's on that 24. I can see it on the 23 environment as well, not just on the 24.4. but I can find out more. I just know that it's just recently available, but I don't think it's part of that 24.1 or part of the wave 1 rollout, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks.
Okay, so Matt Pearson says with Power Platform environments, yes, I do. So Matt's question is, is our Power Platform environment variables basically an easier way to build your flows, where I was showing that, hey, it's kind of a pain. Sorry, I'm trying to navigate to Power Automate real quick. And again, I'm assuming that this is what Matt's meaning is to put this in a solution so that we have environment variables, so that essentially this is a brown box here and this is a brown box, so that as we're creating our flows that we can just update that there. And yes, I do like using those when I'm building flows, if that's what you mean. There, Matt.
Yeah, that's the question. Thanks.
Cool. Cool. Dustin, I hope I briefly saw that question out of the corner of my eye as far as like locking records and releasing records and that approval workflow. So I'm hoping that has covered that or answered that question. That's the way that I read that question. If that's not what you're looking for, let me know. Okay. And then Bob's got another question here, and it is, what is the best practice for setting a group of approvers? What groups supported best? The new to BC security groups? Uh, I don't know. It's a great question, Bob. I don't know that I'm just going to be honest. I don't know that I've got a really, really great answer for what's the best practice for setting a group of approvers. A lot of times whenever I'm looking at that, it's like a hierarchy. I don't know if I'm ever looking at like a group of approvers. I'm usually looking at like I said, a hierarchy of approvers. And I'm creating, I'm looking at it at a table and I'm saying, okay, who's the user? What's the department and what's the amount, right? And so I'm looking at it from like a group from this standpoint, but not normally having to set like security groups and approval user groups, because whenever I get started, like I actually never create out of the box approval workflows for Business Central because I don't have to. If somebody needs that, guess what? They don't hire me. They do it themselves. So I don't actually necessarily have to mess with the work, like the setup of creating approval, like out of the box workflows. Like I don't have to use those groups. I just have them set on the approval user setup page. And never even had access to that approval matrix before. So I don't know that I've got an answer for you. Is the best that I've got, instead of giving you some baloney answer. Okay. Happy to have more conversation with you about that though, Bob. I don't know if that's helpful. I mean, maybe other people.
Yeah.
I mean, throw this out to the group. Does anyone else, use group that then maybe they have some best practices?
Yeah. So the main thing is I just was looking to see if groups are supported, that you can just put a group in, so that as they change who is approving this document type, you're modifying the group membership, not modifying the flow. Is that
Yeah,
best?
that's a great question. I haven't tested. Nope. So I'm just trying to think from that. And again, I've never really had to, out of all the approvals, honestly, that I've worked up and said, and it's not normally like, hey, like normally the group has other parameters that they're changing, and then we just update the matrix. And to me, it's always like, hey, how often is this changing? And that's where I usually like change the matrix. So I feel like I understand with what you're saying. I just haven't handled it that way, if that makes sense. Interesting though. Because here's the way that I would do that though, thinking about this. In this, so this requester user details, so you could use essentially, if you could use like the office, like get a group, like an email, like people that are associated with that. Like I would use the office credential side of it to say, like, essentially if you had like an AP approval email address, is that kind of what you're saying, like some type of like user group in there? Is it an office user group? Is it, because I think you said intranet, so that's how you would say, right?
It would in accounting, it would be basically a director and above level group. So,
but are you setting that up in Business Central, or like from the like the M365 intranet level? I think you said intranet, right?
yeah. So an Active Directory group of users, which we now can sync into BC and have it a security group in BC. So that's, it's defined in its members are defined in Active Directory or Entra.
Yeah. So I haven't done it, but just thinking about this out loud, what I would say is the difference would be is like use this one says this isn't probably the right one. And again, this is named, but basically I'm pointing at this orange because this orange, think of this orange as like your office, like access to intranet, right? So I bet that there's like a group when they're like get group, to your point, then it's going to just email. And so then when it gets like the output of that in here, right? And it's assigned to would be, like email or group or whatever the output here would be. And then that would be a way that you could manage that group here. And then that would update the flow from that person. You know what I mean? So you're not having to manage the flow. You're just managing it to one place. And then that'll roll down the rest of the way through. Okay. So in Business Central, we have approver type approver, salesperson, and workflow user groups to use them in Power Automate. Do we need to customize Power Automate? So let's see here. So I think that what you're saying, you have the approver type of approver salesperson. So you're trying to identify, basically, I think you have a matrix you need in here. And this is for this last question in the group. In this box, oh, I think we're a minute over too. So if anyone has to drop, I totally get it. I'll hang out for a second here. But you're wanting to put the salesperson in here, I think is what you're saying, right?
Yes.
And so what I would do is that salesperson is going to, I think, be the requester, or is the salesperson the requester, I guess is the better question.
It is like on a purchase. So let's say if it is a salesperson or purchaser, on purchase header, we choose a sales purchaser code, right? So that purchaser code would be the approver for that. And that purchaser code is linked to the user ID, user setup field in the Business Central. So can we use the combination that we defined in the Business Central to use in Power Automate? Or do we need some custom?
No, you could do it. You would probably just have to like combine up a few, you know what I mean? Like look at the logic and say, hey, again, very similar to what I was saying to like Bob, you may just have to grab it a different way to say, grab the salesperson name, map that salesperson name to the display names email address, because ultimately what you want at the end of the day is that email address so that you can put that into this assigned to box. But you should not need that's what I say. You should not need any customization to make that happen. You're just going to need to like map it out to figure out what that logic is and see. You may need to just bring in another step, right? You may just need to modify this template a little bit so that you get exactly what you want.
Got it.
Cool. Well, again, thanks so much, everyone, for staying. And I'll throw this up here one more time. If you guys have any other questions, you know where to find me, of course, on LinkedIn. I think that's the only place I advertise this. I know that y'all probably know exactly where to find me there. But if you have any other questions, feel free to hit me up in the DMs. And if your organization needs any help creating approval flows, I'd love to help you as well. Thanks so much, y'all.